The connections between the ancient Roman Circus and the modern Super Bowl are becoming more apparent, and the public's becoming more conscious of it. I think it's really seeping out into the general knowledge of the public, and we're seeing that more and more every year. The same structures that we see that held the population together in ancient Rome at that time are pretty evident in the way that our modern civilization has manifested. I think we all see that. Let's not forget, although Rome was a great civilization for a very long time, there were a lot of key markers that led to its definitive downfall. So when they say history repeats itself, I don't think that's fair, because that leaves us looking for direct connections, when really it's more accurate to say that history rhymes. So we need to look for similarities in more abstract ways, but these similarities are so direct. The Roman Colosseum, built in the 1st century, able to hold more than 50,000 people, I could see the thrill of it. And I'm not into professional sports, but I could see the thrill of the modern day Super Bowl. I understand how you can be surrounded by all of that energy and the bright lights, and everyone's there, depending on what side you're on, you're all cheering. It's a collective unity. It's that tribal connection that we feel with our fellow man, or that tribal resistance, that tribal division that you feel against the other team. I understand it. I get it. And yes, it's fun and it's thrilling, but I do think that it's a somewhat primitive mentality. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I put the game on because my son wanted to watch it. We didn't pay for it. Obviously, we streamed it for free on Tubi, but it was cool, and I made a bunch of wings, and they were great, and we enjoyed it. You know, I watched it from a distance while I was cooking. It's cool. And I can understand the thrill of it, just like I could understand the thrill of being an ancient Roman citizen and walking down these streets, these bustling streets towards the Colosseum, which at the time, and still is, a mega architectural marvel, a beautiful, gigantic piece of intricate artwork. It really was. I could understand that, being, set yourself in the shoes of an ancient Roman, and you walk into this giant stadium, and they have these big elaborate cloths with retractable awnings and drainage systems, complex drainage systems and everything. It was an architectural marvel. I understand. And then they put on these giant elaborate shows, and I could see how people could be distracted by that. And the thrill of it it's encompassing, obviously. The Romans, they were really into betting. Actually, they had to pass a law against placing bets. They weren't allowed to gamble. Gambling was actually outlawed in ancient Rome for a while, except of course for the leaders who could get away with it. It's just like with modern day sports, and I don't want to be a hater, but it's like, I do feel like a lot of money gets wasted. I've always felt that, and I don't care how many of them donate to charities and how many of them give out free stuff to people that are there. I think it's a net negative for the public, without a doubt. Of course, sports are important. That's why I love to keep my kids in sports. But I do think that as a population, putting that much energy and that much focus and that much money into sports is definitely degenerative on a massive scale. When you're talking about on big scales, I think it really does add up over time. So, and this is what happened in ancient Rome. Even before the Colosseum was even built, all the way back the Colosseum was built in the 1st century. Before that, all the way back to like 180 BC, there was a law that was passed called Vilia Annalis, and it was a law to go against spending too much of the public funds. And it was also meant to just keep rulers in check with their fiscal responsibilities and things like that. The main point of it was to prevent demagoguery, or basically political monopoly. They didn't want any one ruler to be able to just dump all of his money into winning over the public, because no matter how good of a ruler you are, if you don't have enough money to compete with the wicked ruler that might be richer than you, then it could obviously lead to devastating downfall. And this is actually what ended up happening. Even though that law was passed in 180 BC, and just like the ancient Romans, they passed the law against gambling, the richest portions of the population were still able to gamble. They could get away with it. Just like, I think we see that pretty much in our modern day society, maybe not so much with the gambling, but with the overspending. They wanted to know that all of the money that the rulers were spending was going to be accounted for. And they didn't want them just spending it to win over the public unless they were going to it was going to benefit the economy in some way. So there was laws passed just specifically to keep rulers from spending too much public funds on these types of events. But that didn't stop, obviously, the richest rulers. They still got away with it. Julius Caesar was one of the ones that was most well known for this. And even though there might have been some small portions of the population that would grumble and complain about it, and there might have been some other rulers that didn't appreciate it, they spoke out against it in small pockets, because Julius Caesar spent so much money on these major events, he was able to push his political agenda during these events, and it won over the population. One of the most unifying things about the Colosseum was that whether you were rich or you were poor, you could attend the events. So they had all classes there, they had all types of people there where everyone could come together. And of course, they pushed it as a sense of unity. Even when they would put on certain acts and certain plays, and just to be clear here, like in the Colosseum, it wasn't just gladiator fights, but that's what it's well known for. We know that slaves or prisoners were put in there to fight as gladiators and fight to the death. And they also imported animals from all around: crocodiles, hippos, elephants, lions, tigers, and they would put the animals up against each other, or they would put them up against other gladiators. We're all pretty well aware of that, but they would also, that's where they hosted chariot races. They would sometimes just do public executions, but they would also replay battles, or they would put on big acts, big plays. And we know that the Romans were really adamant about their drama. When you say the Colosseum was the original Super Bowl, or when I say that, really it wasn't the original, because these things were going on long before the Colosseum was built, all the way back to Circus Maximus. And even that was inspired from the more ancient Greek events that used to put on. So, you know, circus just comes from the same Latin root word, circa, or circle, or cycle, because these things were built in round circles usually. But I think it also, that's why it's funny how it almost seems like we're coming full circle as a society, and almost leading us to the same inevitable outcome. Hopefully not. What happened with Julius Caesar was that even though they had a law against spending too much money on these events, he still won over the public by just putting on these lavish games. But all of these events were paid for with public funds. So these were not resources going back into the economy. But of course, what they did to keep people quiet, they would hand out free food, free grain. I know Augustus was most popular for this. A little bit right after Julius Caesar, Augustus would put on these big events. He would spend way too much of the public funds, but he would hand out a bunch of free grain. And it kept the people happy, even though really he was spending their money in a way. Although it's pretty well known, I don't know if most people realize how direct these correlations are. In ancient Rome, they would put on the biggest events in the Colosseum during times of turmoil, or economic desperation, when the economy was hurting the most, and when people started grumbling the most against their leader, whoever it was at the time, he would throw one of these big major events just to win over the public again. And it really just kept them disillusioned for so long. This is actually one of the main reasons for the downfall of the Republic. That's why the Roman Republic pretty much collapsed, because they were spending too much money, and that money wasn't getting put back into the economy. Now, I know historians have a lot of intricate, detailed reasons, and the downfall of the Republic is much more complex than just that. But that was a major contributor. It's very well known that wasting all of these public funds was a major contributor to the downfall of the Roman Republic. This is when it turned into the Roman Empire, which eventually led to the collapse of Rome. They would put on these plays, or they would reenact these battles. Really interesting how sometimes they would take like a prisoner and they would use that prisoner as the villain in the play. And in a lot of these stories, the villain ends up dying in the end. I know they even used Hercules. A lot of times the prisoners would be Hercules in the play, and anyone who knows the original story of Hercules, his outcome was not pretty. So it was fascinating how they did that. And still, although obviously we've come a long way, we've evolved, we've gotten much better as a society. And this is where we gotta give a little bit of credit to the Christian movement, because it was when Christianity and a lot of the morality that followed from some of the Christian doctrines started to seep into the society and the public mind, that people started to question some of these wicked events even more. And that is when people started to really speak out against it, and that kind of caused the end of these wild games. But regardless, some sort of lavish events continued until they ran out of public funds and had to focus more on defense. They used these events to push their agenda. They would often speak about the power of Rome, and they would talk about the enemies they've conquered. And it's just, these days there's a lot of patriotism surrounding the Super Bowl, and there's good reason to believe there was a strong sense of that going on back in the ancient Roman days as well. So, it's not to say that all football is bad or anything like that. I can appreciate sports and the discipline and the structure that comes from it, but I think mentally as a society we put too much focus in some of the least important places. I do have a deep dive planned. I do have some plans for some upcoming sessions that I've been researching really deep on, but I just figured I should probably come up here tonight and talk a little bit about that. The halftime show was interesting, to say the least. I do think it was a major cultural landmark, and it was pretty cool to see, even if people didn't actually enjoy the music. I wish the public awareness would spread a little bit, and I think our consciousness could shift a little bit in a slightly more productive direction, and that's my opinion. And obviously the halftime show was a big cultural landmark, regardless of how you felt about it. Obviously that was for a specific subset of the population, and I think it was powerful and effective. And even I'm not the biggest Kendrick fan, and anyone who knows me knows I've never been any type of Drake fan. So it was cool to see that. And I mean, Kendrick's cool, and I've always respected him. So I mean, I personally don't really listen to his music, but I appreciate the message. So it was cool to see that. It was really cool to see the impact he made, and I never really cared about Drake or his sing-songy stuff. And I gotta say, at least Kendrick's performance wasn't over-sexualized. wasn't there. It wasn't violent. It wasn't, it wasn't too bad actually. I mean, at least he rapped, and it was cool to see him bring down one of the industry puppets in a way. So yeah, I'm gonna probably call it a night on that. I just wanted to hop up here real quick and say how I felt about that. All of the similarities are really fascinating to me. So I appreciate all you people. I still got that Angels and Demons video I'm working on. Got a lot of great stuff coming out. Really excited to start releasing some of this stuff. And everyone who's been out there following so far, I appreciate you. And if you don't follow me on YouTube, definitely go subscribe and check out some of those playlists, because I've talked about the issue and ethics in some of these moral dilemmas we face on a public scale. I've covered that pretty deep in some of the past videos. So thank you guys. I appreciate all you beautiful souls very much. I'm going to call it a night.